She walked out of her marriage in the middle of a storm, with nothing but a suitcase. 3 hours later, a black car found her at BY morning. She was on a private jet, and about to discover her husband's secrets were far darker than she ever imagined. The rain didn't just fall that night, it attacked the house. It slammed against the glass walls like something desperate to get in, or something trying to warn her to get out. Evelyn Carter stood in the center of a bedroom that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished marble, a bed too large for one person and far too empty for two. And yet, for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't looking at the beauty of it. She was seeing it for what it really was. A stage. And she had been the decoration. Her suitcase sat open on the bed. Not new, not expensive, just something she had owned long before she ever met Richard Cole, back when her life had been smaller, but somehow more real. Her hands moved automatically, folding the last of her clothes. But they weren't steady. Not because she was afraid, because she had waited too long to do this. Behind her, on the dresser, lay the divorce papers. Clean. Final. Her signature still faintly smudged at the bottom, as if even the ink had hesitated before accepting what her heart had already known for months. It was over. Not with a fight. Not with shouting or broken glass. Just silence. The kind of silence that slowly suffocates you while everything on the outside still looks perfect. She had married a man the world admired. Richard Cole, CEO of Cole Dynamics Group. A man who walked into rooms and owned them without raising his voice. A man who built companies, closed deals, and made decisions that moved millions of dollars without blinking. A man who had once looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. At least she thought he had. Evelyn let out a slow breath and closed the suitcase with a soft click. The sound echoed more than it should have, as if the room itself had been holding its breath. She turned toward the hallway. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Not peaceful. Not calm. Empty. That kind of quiet had a weight to it. It pressed against your chest. It reminded you, with every step, that no one was coming. She walked past the long corridor lined with photographs, smiling faces, captured moments, a version of herself she barely recognized anymore. In every frame, she looked happy, certain, alive. She didn't stop to look closer, because the truth was harder to face when it had once been so convincing. Somewhere between the wedding day and the 3rd anniversary, something had shifted. Not all at once. It never happens all at once. It starts with small things. A canceled dinner, a delayed call, a conversation that gets shorter, then disappears altogether. At first, you explain it. He's busy. He's stressed. This is temporary. Then you adjust. You stop expecting. You stop asking. You learn how to be quiet inside your own life. And before you realize it, you're no longer part of a relationship. You're just present. Tonight was supposed to be different. She had made dinner herself, set the table, even lit candles, though she couldn't remember the last time they had done something as simple as sit across from each other and talk. He didn't come. Not late. Not delayed. He forgot. A single message. Running late. Important client dinner. We'll celebrate another time. Another time. Evelyn had stared at those words longer than she should have, because deep down, she already knew the truth. There would never be another time. That was the moment something inside her stopped trying to hold on. She wasn't leaving because she was angry. She was leaving because there was nothing left to stay for. As she reached the top of the staircase, the house opened up beneath her, wide, impressive, hollow. Every inch of it designed to impress people who would never see what it felt like to live there. To live alone, with someone else's name still attached to yours. She adjusted her grip on the suitcase and walked down slowly. Each step felt final. Each step felt right. Outside, headlights cut through the rain. The taxi had arrived. Evelyn paused at the front door for just a moment. No note. No explanation. If he hadn't noticed her disappearing while she was still there, he wouldn't notice her absence now. She opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and real. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not relief. Not happiness. But something close to freedom. She stepped out into the rain. And she didn't look back. Hello, and welcome to Billionaire Bliss Audio. If you've ever felt invisible in a place that was supposed to feel like home, this story might stay with you longer than you expect. And if you're new here, take a second to subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling stories like this, stories that don't just entertain, but make you feel something real. Because what happened to Evelyn Carter that night wasn't the end of her story. It was the moment everything began to change. And sometimes, the moment you finally walk away from what's breaking you is the exact moment something unexpected begins to find you. By the time Evelyn Carter reached her sister's apartment, the storm hadn't eased. It had followed her. Rain clung to her coat, her hair, her skin, as if the night itself wasn't ready to let her go just yet. The taxi pulled away without ceremony, its taillights disappearing into the wet blur of the street, leaving her standing there with a suitcase in one hand and a life she no longer recognized behind her. The building in front of her was nothing like the place she had just left. No grand entrance, no polished stone, no curated perfection, just a narrow stairwell, a flickering hallway light, and a door with a small wreath hanging slightly crooked at eye level. But something about it felt steady, real. Before she could knock, the door opened. Lena Carter stood there, barefoot, hair loosely tied back, eyes already searching Evelyn's face as if she had been waiting for this moment longer than either of them wanted to admit. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Lena stepped forward and pulled her into a hug so tight it felt like it might hold her together. And that's when everything broke. Evelyn didn't cry quietly. It wasn't graceful, or controlled, or dignified. It was raw. 3 years of swallowed words, of pretending, of convincing herself she was fine. It all came out in uneven breaths against her sister's shoulder. Her hands clutched at Lena's sweater like she was afraid if she let go, she might drift back into the life she had just escaped. Lena didn't ask questions, didn't try to fix it. She just held her. "You're here," she whispered. "That's enough." And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn believed it might be true. Hours passed without structure. Time didn't move in minutes. It moved in small moments. A cup of tea placed gently in her hands. A blanket draped over her shoulders. The quiet hum of a small apartment where nothing was perfect, but everything felt lived in. Evelyn sat curled into the corner of the couch, staring down at the pale swirl of steam rising from her tea. Her fingers traced the edge of the mug absent-mindedly, as if she were trying to anchor herself to something simple. "I should have left sooner," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't regret. It was realization. Lena leaned back in her chair across from her, watching her carefully. "Maybe," she said. "But you didn't." Evelyn let out a breath that felt heavier than it should have. "I knew," she admitted. "For a long time, I knew something was wrong. I just kept waiting for it to get better." Lena didn't interrupt. "That's the part one don't understand," Evelyn continued. "Why I stayed." Lena tilted her head slightly, her expression soft but certain. "Because you loved him," she said. "And because you thought that was enough." Evelyn looked down again. Love. Such a simple word for something that had slowly erased her. Her phone, resting on the kitchen counter, suddenly buzzed. The sound cut through the quiet like something misplaced. Both of them turned toward it. Evelyn frowned. "I don't even think anyone knows I'm here," she said. Lena stood, walking over to the counter, and glanced at the screen. Her brow furrowed. "It's a private number." Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. A flicker of unease. "Read it." Lena hesitated for a second before speaking. "MS Carter. A car will arrive at your location in 15 minutes. Please be ready." Silence followed. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Something stranger. Evelyn slowly stood, walking toward her. "That doesn't make sense." Before either of them could say more, the phone buzzed again. Another message. "This concerns your future. Trust me." And then, a third. AV Lena looked up sharply. "This isn't funny." "I'm not joking," Evelyn said, her voice tightening. "I didn't send anything." They both turned toward the window. At first, there was nothing. Just rain. Then, headlights. A black car turned onto the street, its movement smooth, deliberate. It didn't hesitate. Didn't slow down as if searching for an address. It already knew exactly where it was going. Evelyn felt her pulse begin to rise. The car came to a stop directly in front of the building. The engine stayed running. The driver stepped out, opening an umbrella, and stood beside the back door. Waiting. "This is not okay," Lena said immediately, stepping in front of Evelyn as if she could block whatever this was from reaching her. "You're not going out there." Evelyn didn't respond right away, because the fear she expected to feel wasn't the only thing there. There was something else. Something unfamiliar. For 3 years, her life had been predictable, controlled. Safe. And empty. This wasn't safe. It didn't make sense. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel empty. I just left everything, Evelyn said quietly. That doesn't mean you walk into something dangerous, Lena shot back. Evelyn looked at her. Really looked at her. And then, almost to her own surprise, she smiled. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she finally understood something she hadn't before. I think I've been afraid for too long, she said. Lena shook her head. That's not a reason to do something reckless. Maybe not, Evelyn replied. Or maybe, this is the first time I'm not making a decision based on fear. The two of them stood there, the weight of the moment settling between them. Outside, the driver didn't move. Didn't rush. Just waited. As if he knew. She would come. Evelyn reached for her coat. Lena grabbed her arm. If you don't check in with me in 2 hours, I'm calling the police, she said firmly. Evelyn nodded. Fair. She stepped toward the door, her heart pounding harder with every step. Not with panic, but with something dangerously close to anticipation. The hallway felt narrower on the way out. The air colder. But her movements didn't slow. When she stepped outside, the rain hit her again, sharp and immediate, as if trying to pull her back. She didn't stop. The driver opened the door. Ms. Carter. No explanation. No reassurance. Just her name. Evelyn glanced back once. Lena stood in the doorway, arms crossed tightly, watching her with a mix of worry and something else. Something like understanding. Evelyn gave a small nod. Then she got into the car. And as the door closed behind her, sealing her into a world she didn't understand, she realized something that would stay with her long after that night was over. Sometimes, the most dangerous decisions are the ones that lead you back to yourself. And the moment the car door closed, Evelyn Carter understood she had crossed a line she could not uncross. The city faded behind tinted glass, swallowed by rain and distance, until even the familiar became unrecognizable. The driver didn't speak. The partition between them remained up, leaving her alone with the quiet hum of the engine and the louder noise of her own thoughts. This was reckless. She knew that. Getting into a stranger's car in the middle of the night, following instructions from an anonymous message, it wasn't just unusual. It was the kind of decision people warned you about. And yet, she hadn't hesitated. Not really. Because something in her had shifted the moment she walked out of that house. Fear no longer felt like something to obey. It felt like something to question. The car moved with purpose, navigating through the storm with practiced ease. Streetlights streaked across the windows in blurred lines, each one marking distance from the life she had just left behind. Evelyn sat still, her hands resting in her lap, fingers loosely intertwined, not tense, but not relaxed either. Suspended. Waiting. The road began to open up, the density of the city thinning into something quieter, more deliberate. After what felt like both minutes and hours, the car turned onto a private drive, the gate already opening before they reached it. That was the first sign. Whoever had sent that message had expected her to come. The airfield appeared slowly through the rain. Low buildings, subtle lighting, everything controlled and understated in a way that suggested real power. Not the kind that needed to be announced. The car came to a stop. The driver stepped out immediately, umbrella in hand, moving to open her door with the same quiet precision. Ms. Carter. No explanation. No introduction. Just certainty. Evelyn stepped out, the rain instantly wrapping around her again. Colder here somehow, sharper. Her eyes lifted, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The jet sat on the tarmac like something unreal. Sleek. Silent. Waiting. It wasn't just expensive. It was intentional. Every detail about this moment felt designed. The driver gestured toward the stairs. If you'll follow me. Evelyn didn't ask questions. She wasn't sure she wanted the answers yet. Her shoes clicked softly against the wet ground as she walked forward, each step carrying her deeper into something she still couldn't define. The stairs descended automatically. As she approached, as if the aircraft itself had acknowledged her arrival. At the top, the cabin door stood open. Warm light spilled out into the storm. And inside, someone was waiting. She stepped in. The door sealed shut behind her with a quiet finality that felt louder than it should have. For a brief second, she just stood there, taking it in. The interior was everything she expected, and more. Not just luxury, but restraint. Nothing excessive, nothing loud. Everything placed with purpose. And then she saw him. Alexander Vaughn stood near the far end of the cabin, his posture relaxed, but his presence anything but casual. He looked like a man who didn't need to introduce himself, because the world had already learned his name. Dark suit, clean lines, no unnecessary movement. But it wasn't his appearance that caught her attention. It was his eyes, focused, unflinching, as if he had been waiting not just for her arrival, but for this exact moment. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice even, controlled. "Thank you for trusting your instincts." Evelyn didn't move closer. She didn't sit. She didn't pretend this was normal. "You have about 10 seconds before I decide this was a mistake," she said. There was no hostility in her tone, just clarity. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, not offense. Recognition. "Fair enough," he said. He set the glass in his hand down on a nearby table and took a step forward, closing just enough distance to make the conversation real. "I'll be direct," he continued. "I've known about you for 3 years." The words landed harder than she expected. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "That's not a good start." "No," he agreed calmly. "It isn't." He didn't rush to justify it, didn't soften it. "I've been tracking Richard Cole for 5. That name, spoken here, in this place, felt different, detached, as if it belonged to a life she had already stepped out of. "And you're part of that story," Alexander added. Evelyn crossed her arms slightly, not defensive, but grounded. "Explain." He held her gaze. "My sister was engaged to Richard Cole." The statement was simple, but it carried weight. They were planning a future, building something together. And then, he paused, not for effect, but because the memory demanded it. He left her. Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest. "For someone more useful to his business," Alexander continued. "Better connections, better positioning." The pattern was starting to form before he even finished speaking. He walked away from her publicly, he said. No warning, no explanation that made sense. Just gone. Evelyn swallowed slowly. Richard had never mentioned any of this. Not once. "She didn't recover," Alexander said, his voice quieter now, though no less steady. "She lost everything. Not all at once, but piece by piece." He looked away briefly, his reflection faint in the darkened window beside him. 5 years ago, she took her own life. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Evelyn felt it settle around them, pressing against her ribs, demanding to be acknowledged. "I'm sorry," she said, the words instinctive but sincere. Alexander nodded once. "So was I." When he looked back at her, something had shifted. Not anger, not grief. Something colder, more deliberate. "I spent years building something strong enough to take everything from him," he said. Piece by piece. Quietly, legally. He reached for a folder and placed it on the table between them. "And as of yesterday," Evelyn's eyes dropped to it. "I own 52% of Cole Dynamics Group." Her breath caught. Not dramatically, just enough to make her realize. This wasn't a story she had stepped into. It was a plan. And somehow, she had just become part of it. And once Evelyn realized she hadn't stepped into a coincidence, but into something carefully built, she understood that whatever came next would not be simple. The folder sat between them like a quiet truth waiting to be accepted. Evelyn didn't reach for it immediately. She wasn't afraid of what was inside. She was aware that opening it meant stepping further into a reality she hadn't chosen until a few hours ago. "Why me?" she asked. Not defensive, not emotional, just honest. Alexander didn't hesitate. "Because you're the only variable he didn't account for." Evelyn's eyes flickered slightly. "That's not an answer." "It is," he said calmly. "Just not the one you expected." He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together, not imposing, just focused. "Richard builds systems," he continued. "Predictable ones. He surrounds himself with people who fit into those systems. People who benefit him. People who depend on him." Evelyn listened, her posture still, her attention sharp. "You didn't," Alexander said. The simplicity of it caught her off guard. "You were never part of his structure. You were an accessory to it." There was no cruelty in the way he said it, just precision. Evelyn let out a slow breath, absorbing the words without flinching. "I think I knew that," she said quietly. "I just didn't know how to prove it." Alexander nodded once. "That's the difference between instinct and evidence." He slid the folder closer to her. "This is evidence." This time, Evelyn reached for it. The pages inside weren't dramatic. No bold headlines. No obvious betrayal spelled out in a single line. It was numbers. Transfers, dates, patterns. She didn't need to understand every detail to feel what it meant. He had been preparing. Not recently. From the beginning. Her fingers paused on one page. 3 months after the wedding, she murmured. Alexander watched her carefully. Yes. Evelyn leaned back slightly, the paper still in her hand. That early, she said, almost to herself. Not shock. Something else. Clarity. He never believed this would last, she said. Alexander didn't respond right away. He believed it would serve a purpose, he said instead. Evelyn closed the folder slowly. For a long moment, she said nothing. And in that silence, something important happened. Not externally, not visibly. Internally. The last piece of doubt she had been holding on to disappeared. It wasn't her fault. It hadn't been something she failed to fix. It had never been something she was meant to succeed in. She placed the folder back on the table. So what happens now? She asked. Alexander leaned back slightly, giving her space again. Now, he said, you decide. The simplicity of the answer made her pause. You're not asking me to help you take him down, she pressed. I don't need help doing that, he replied. There was no arrogance in his tone, just certainty. Then why am I here? Alexander held her gaze. Because what happens after matters more than what happens to him. That landed differently. Evelyn's brow softened, just slightly. He continued. I can dismantle coal dynamics. Sell it. Strip it down until there's nothing left. That would be easy. He paused. But that wouldn't change anything. Evelyn studied him. So you want to rebuild it? I want to give it a different direction, he said. One that isn't built on manipulation or leverage. And you think I can help with that? I think you understand something he never did. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. What's that? Alexander didn't look away. That people aren't assets. The words settled between them. Quiet, but undeniable. For a moment, Evelyn felt something she hadn't expected to feel here. Not pressure, not fear. Respect. And if I say no? She asked. Alexander nodded toward the door behind her. Then we turn around. You go back to your sister's apartment. You rebuild your life however you choose. No persuasion. No insistence. Just an option. And if I say yes? His expression didn't change. You come to New York. You stay somewhere safe. You take your time. You learn everything you need to make an informed decision. And then, he said, you decide what role you want to play in what comes next. Evelyn looked down at her hands. Just hours ago, she had been standing in a house that no longer felt like hers, wondering how she had lost control of her own life. Now, someone was offering it back to her. Not as a gift, as a choice. The difference mattered. She stood slowly, walking a few steps toward the window. Outside, the storm still raged, the darkness stretching endlessly beyond the glass. She could go back, start over quietly, find something small, manageable, safe. Or she could step into something uncertain, something bigger than she had planned, something that required her to stop being who she had been. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment, not to escape the decision, but to feel it fully. When she opened them again, there was no hesitation left. She turned back to him. Tell the pilot to go, she said. And in that moment, without raising her voice, without asking for permission, Evelyn Carter chose herself. And once Evelyn chose to move forward, the world didn't slow down to let her adjust. It accelerated, as if everything that had been waiting for her decision was now unfolding all at once. New York didn't greet her gently. It never did. The city rose around her in steel and glass, sharp lines cutting into the morning sky. Everything in motion, everything purposeful. From the back seat of the car, Evelyn watched it pass by, not as a visitor this time, not as someone standing slightly outside of it, but as someone stepping into something she didn't fully understand yet. She hadn't slept much, not because she couldn't, because her mind wouldn't stop. Every conversation on that plane had stayed with her, not as noise, but as clarity. The kind that doesn't overwhelm you. It reorganizes you. The car came to a stop in front of a building she recognized immediately. Coal Dynamics Group. Richard's Empire. For a moment, she didn't move. Not out of fear, out of awareness. This place had once made her feel small without ever saying a word. The few times she had been here during her marriage, she had felt like a guest in a world that tolerated her presence but never truly acknowledged it. Today felt different. Not because the building had changed. Because she had. Ready? Alexander's voice broke through her thoughts. Evelyn glanced at him briefly, then back at the entrance. No, she said honestly. A faint smile touched his expression. Good, he replied. That means you understand what this is. She opened the door. The air outside was cooler than she expected, crisp against her skin as she stepped onto the sidewalk. People moved around them, fast, focused, unaware of the shift about to happen inside those walls. Evelyn adjusted her posture slightly. Not forced, not practiced. Just aligned. Then she walked forward. The glass doors slid open. The lobby was exactly as she remembered, immaculate, controlled, designed to impress without appearing to try. The receptionist looked up briefly, offering a polite smile that faltered just slightly when she recognized Evelyn. There was a flicker of confusion, recognition, uncertainty. Evelyn didn't slow down. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Patricia stood near the elevators, her tablet in hand, her expression sharp as always. But the moment her eyes landed on Evelyn, something shifted. Mrs. Cole, Ms. Carter, Evelyn corrected calmly, her voice even her tone not defensive, just precise. Patricia blinked, recalibrating quickly, her professionalism catching up to her surprise. And Mr. Vaughn, she added, nodding slightly. Yes, Alexander said. We're here for the board meeting. Patricia hesitated for a fraction of a second. They're about to begin. I should notify. That won't be necessary. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Evelyn followed him as they moved past her toward the conference room at the end of the hall. Each step felt deliberate, not rushed, not hesitant. Present. The doors opened. The room inside was already in motion, voices mid-discussion, papers shifting, decisions being made. And then, silence. It happened gradually, like a ripple moving across the surface of water. One voice stopped, then another, until the entire room stilled. Richard Cole stood at the head of the table. For a moment, he didn't react, didn't speak. He just looked at her. And Evelyn realized something she hadn't expected. He hadn't seen this coming. What is this? He said finally, his voice controlled, but tighter than she had ever heard it. Evelyn stepped forward. Not aggressively, not emotionally, just fully. Good morning, Richard. No accusation, no hesitation, just presence. His gaze flicked briefly to Alexander, then back to her. Why are you here? The question wasn't curious. It was defensive. Evelyn didn't answer. Alexander did. As of yesterday, he said calmly, placing a portfolio on the table, I became the majority shareholder of this company. The words didn't explode. They landed. Heavy. Measured. One of the board members reached for the document, flipping it open, his expression shifting as he read. This is legitimate, he said quietly. Richard moved quickly, grabbing the papers, scanning them with increasing urgency. That's not possible, he said. There are protections, structures. They were addressed, Alexander replied. No tension, no confrontation, just fact. Evelyn watched it happen, not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with a kind of stillness she hadn't felt before. This was the man she had built her life around. And for the first time, she was seeing him clearly, not as powerful, not as untouchable, but as someone who had relied on control more than truth. Richard looked up again, his attention locking onto her. You knew about this? Evelyn met his gaze. No, she said, but I know enough now. She reached into her bag and placed her own folder on the table. He didn't open it immediately, but he knew. I trusted you, she said, her voice steady, not raised, not trembling. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement. And you planned for me to leave with nothing. Richard's jaw tightened. That's not what this is. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Then explain it. He didn't. Because he couldn't. Not in a way that would make sense outside the system he had built. Alexander stepped in. The board will be voting on leadership this afternoon, he said. Given the financial irregularities and potential legal exposure, I expect a transition will be necessary. Richard's focus shifted again, scanning the room, looking for support that didn't come. And if I refuse? Alexander didn't move. Then this becomes public. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was final. Evelyn watched the realization settle over him. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, undeniable pieces. He wasn't in control anymore. Not here. Not now. I need time, Richard said. You have until 5, Alexander replied. Evelyn didn't wait for anything else. She turned and walked out. The hallway felt different on the way back. Not because it had changed, because she had. The version of her that once walked these floors quietly, trying to take up less space, no longer existed. And what replaced her wasn't louder, wasn't harder, just certain. As the elevator doors closed, she caught her reflection in the mirrored surface. For a moment, she studied it. Not critically, not cautiously, just honestly. And for the first time in years, she recognized herself. Not as someone who had been left behind, but as someone who had finally stepped forward. And when the confrontation was over, what remained wasn't victory, it was responsibility. The silence that followed those events didn't feel empty. It felt like a space waiting to be filled with something better, or something just as broken, if left unchanged. Evelyn stood in what used to be Richard's office, her hands resting lightly against the edge of the desk that had once symbolized power to her. Now, it felt like something else entirely. A decision point. The city stretched out beyond the windows, alive with motion, indifferent to what had just taken place inside these walls. Companies rise. Companies fall. People lose. People rebuild. The difference wasn't in what happened. It was in what came next. Most people would sell, Evelyn said quietly, her eyes still fixed on the skyline. Alexander stood a few steps behind her, not interrupting, not directing, just listening. Break it apart. Take the profit. Walk away. He nodded once. That would be the efficient choice. Evelyn turned to face him. But not the right one. It wasn't a question. It was a realization she had arrived at on her own. The company Richard had built wasn't inherently broken. It had simply been shaped by the wrong intentions. Systems designed for control instead of contribution. Growth driven by leverage instead of value. That could be dismantled, but it could also be redefined. What if we didn't destroy it? She continued. What if we redirected it? Alexander watched her carefully. Into what? Evelyn didn't answer immediately, because the idea forming in her mind wasn't about business. It was about something far more personal. There are people out there, she said slowly, who are exactly where I was. Not in the same house, not with the same man, but in the same position. Invisible, dependent, waiting for something to change while slowly losing themselves in the process. They don't leave, she continued, not because they're weak, but because they don't see a way out. Alexander's expression shifted slightly, not surprise, but recognition. You're talking about support systems. I'm talking about structure, Evelyn corrected. Real structure. The kind that doesn't just help someone leave, but helps them rebuild. She stepped away from the window, her thoughts becoming clearer as she spoke them out loud. Safe housing, legal guidance, financial literacy, job placement, not charity, not temporary solutions. Something sustainable, something that didn't just catch people when they fell, but gave them a way to stand again. Alexander considered it for a moment. You'd be building something entirely new, he said. Evelyn nodded. Then we build it inside something that already exists. She glanced around the office. This company has reach, resources, infrastructure. It just needs a different purpose. The room grew quiet again. Not uncertain, just focused. And you would lead it? Alexander asked. Evelyn held his gaze. Yes. There was no hesitation in her voice. Because for the first time, she wasn't asking herself if she was capable. She was asking herself if she was willing. And the answer was already there. A small smile touched Alexander's expression. Then we're not rebuilding a company, he said. We're redefining it. Evelyn exhaled slowly, feeling something shift into place inside her. Not closure, not relief. Something more solid than that. Direction. For years, she had been trying to preserve something that was already broken. Now, she was choosing to create something that didn't exist yet. And that difference changed everything. And when purpose finally replaces survival, life doesn't just move forward. It transforms in ways you never thought you deserved. 6 months later, the office no longer felt like a place that belonged to someone else. It belonged to Evelyn Carter. Not because her name was on the door, but because her presence filled the space differently. The walls had changed. The atmosphere had changed. Even the silence carried a different weight, no longer sharp or hollow, but steady, intentional. The company itself had shifted in ways that couldn't be measured only in numbers. Von Carter Enterprises was no longer built on quiet manipulation or strategic advantage. It was built on clarity, on impact, on something that actually reached beyond itself. Evelyn stood by the window, the late afternoon sun casting long reflections across the glass buildings of Manhattan. In her hands, she held a report, Not financial projections, not growth charts, but updates from the initiative she had helped bring to life. The Haven Project. What had once been an idea spoken carefully in a quiet room had become something tangible. Real women, real stories, real transitions. Apartments filled with second chances. Conversations that didn't end in silence. Lives that were no longer paused, but moving again. She closed the folder gently. There was no rush anymore. No need to prove anything. Behind her, the door opened softly. "You're still working?" Alexander said. His voice carried a different tone now. Less guarded. Less weighted by something unresolved. Evelyn turned slightly, a faint smile forming without effort. "I could say the same about you." He stepped inside, holding 2 cups of coffee, placing one on the desk without ceremony. It had become a quiet habit between them. Unspoken, consistent, grounding. "How did the meeting go?" he asked. "They agreed to expand the housing program," she said. "We're opening 2 more locations next quarter." Alexander nodded, not surprised. "You're scaling faster than expected." Evelyn glanced at him. "We're scaling because it's needed." There was a brief pause, not uncomfortable, just full. For a long time, everything between them had been defined by movement. Decisions, strategy, momentum. Now, there was space for something else. Something quieter. "Do you ever think about that night?" Alexander asked. Evelyn didn't need clarification. The car, the message, the choice. She leaned back slightly against the desk, considering the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. And Evelyn looked out at the skyline again. "I think about how close I was to going back upstairs and choosing the same life all over again." Alexander didn't respond, because he understood. "And I think about how nothing that happened after that would have mattered," she continued. "Not the company, not the work, not this." She glanced at him briefly. There was something in that look, something that hadn't been there before. Not uncertainty, not hesitation, just awareness. "I used to think everything changed because someone showed up," she said quietly. "That something outside of me came in and fixed what I couldn't." Alexander's expression shifted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Evelyn shook her head, almost to herself. "But that's not what happened." She straightened, her voice steady. "You didn't save me." The words weren't dismissive. They were honest. "You gave me a choice," she continued. "And I made it." Alexander held her gaze, something softer settling in his eyes. "And that choice changed everything," he said. Evelyn nodded. "Yes," she replied. "Because for the first time, it was mine." Silence followed, but it didn't need to be filled. It held meaning on its own. Outside, the city moved as it always did, unaware of individual stories, indifferent to quiet transformations. But inside that room, something had settled into place. Not a perfect ending, not a dramatic conclusion, something more real than that. A life rebuilt, not from luck, not from rescue, but from the moment someone decided they were no longer willing to disappear inside a version of themselves that didn't feel true. Evelyn picked up the coffee, taking a slow sip as she looked out at the horizon. 6 months ago, she had walked out into the rain with nothing but a suitcase and a decision she didn't fully understand. Now, she stood here, not because everything had been given to her, but because she had chosen to step into something unknown and stay. And maybe that was the part people misunderstood about new beginnings. They don't arrive. They're made. One decision at a time. What makes Evelyn's story linger isn't the luxury, the power shift, or even the dramatic confrontation. It's the quiet truth underneath all of it. She didn't change her life because someone powerful stepped in. She changed her life the moment she stopped negotiating with her own worth. For years, she wasn't trapped by circumstances as much as she was held in place by hope. The kind of hope that keeps you waiting for someone else to become who they promised to be. And that's the hardest kind to walk away from. Because it doesn't feel like leaving a bad situation. It feels like letting go of a version of the future you once believed in. But what Evelyn realized, what most people take years to understand, is that staying in something that slowly erases you is not loyalty. It's self-abandonment. And the moment you choose yourself, even if nothing around you has changed yet, everything begins to. The deeper lesson here is simple, but not easy. Your life will not transform when the right person arrives. It transforms when you make a decision that honors who you are, even if it's uncomfortable, uncertain, or misunderstood by others. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need full clarity. You just need one honest decision that moves you closer to yourself instead of further away. So how do you apply this in your life today? Start small, but start truthfully. Ask yourself one question. Where in my life am I staying out of habit, fear, or hope instead of alignment? And then take one step, just one, that reflects your real answer. It might be a conversation, a boundary, a decision you've been postponing. You don't have to rebuild your entire life overnight. You just have to stop betraying it in small, quiet ways. Now I'd love to hear from you. What's one decision you've been putting off, but deep down you know it's time to make? Share it in the comments so others can learn from your perspective too. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to Billionaire Bliss Audio. Your support helps us continue creating stories that don't just entertain, but truly stay with you.